Hi everyone, I am Nisha of Nico Photography and welcome to Silverpin Studios on behalf of TTPS. My task tonight is to introduce the feature speaker for October. So when Sarita asked me, she said, we need to get some speakers for our meeting. Somebody dynamic and, breaking barriers in photography in the fields of landscape and portraiture and everything. I said I had just the person in mind. But my friend Darren said, no, he's not ready to do that just yet. so, so instead, we have Tim, my other friend. And I will not preempt what he's going to say about his journey in photography. All I would like to add is an interesting tidbit that Tim is the only person I know that eats doubles without pepper. I mean, not even a drop of pepper. So let's not judge him yet. Let's hear all about his creative journey. So without further ado, Tim.
Hi everyone, good night. Just to get things right, I do eat pepper, but I ask them to shake off the spoon, not like throw pepper. So on the shake it and get a couple sprinkles.
Already judge him.
So my name is Thimothy Ali, and I thought about this talk for quite a while. And I told myself, so many people have done this in the past, and there's so much of this on YouTube. I'd probably like to put a little different spin on it. And one of the things I took into consideration is we have Nisha, Darren, Sarita here, and I asked myself, like, what could I say to give them some new light on anything? And there was actually nothing I could come up with. And I've been doing this approximately 5 years, and 5 years I would say full time, as in I've been focusing on this for about 5 years. And throughout this journey, I think the pictures I'll be able to break down the images and be able to help you understand the journey. These slides, I just want to change the slides. So a little bit about my background. So for my background, I started actually being exposed to photos and photography around the age of 21. I just started to shoot on a point and shoot, just like most people. I didn't understand anything about cameras, and I never expected to become what some will call an artist, because I never had an artistic bone in me. Like, I can't draw to save my life. But then when I started to understand angles and understanding how I could capture a moment in time, that kind of fascinated me. But throughout the next 10 years, which would take me to almost the age of 31, I had no real interest in, no real focus. But then in 2018, 2017 to 2018, I started to actually make YouTube videos. And my actual aim was to express my love for movies through YouTube videos and doing movie reviews, doing movie reaction, trailer reactions. And one thing led to another, where I got my first DSLR, which was a T6i, and having that much power in my hands, I started to explore photography and landscape photography. And just like most people, I started to go on Instagram and I started to see people doing certain stuff, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I could try this. Maybe I could capture sunsets. And I started to stalk Brickfield and the temple in Waterloo. I started to stalk these places for months. Every day I would go and I would even watch my images and ask myself, why are my images not looking as good as what I see other people doing? And the curiosity started to push me to start to do more research, start to look at more YouTube videos of creators like Thomas Eaton, Nick Page, Adam Gibbs, and I started to see different techniques, and it really fascinated me. And along that journey, I also met other photographers, two with everything, who's Darren, Rahim, Lawrence, and eventually I met Nisha. And being able to actually have conversations about photography, and Lawrence, Rahim, and Darren and I, we were all in our early stages, and having that journey with someone in that early stage and having the type of conversations that we could have and learning at almost the same pace, that is what really kind of broadened everything for me and started to open my mind like, hey, there's no wrong or right. There's just what I could perceive as art and how I will appreciate it, if that makes sense. So moving on, just go back to the one with the steel wool. So this is one of my early images, where in the beginning I was very curious about light and light painting. I used to see on Instagram all these pictures where people making like all these big sparks, and I started to think, well, probably that's starlight or how they doing it. And then I was exposed to steel wool, and because of steel wool, it really opened my mind to the art of capturing light and what it meant to capture light and how light worked and how the camera system actually works in terms of the shutter speed and what you would need to capture light in different scenarios. This is what actually opened my mind to sunrises, sunsets, and understanding the light when I'm outside capturing regular landscapes and not steel wool. And along with this image, this is where Darren and I, we started to actually, I think this is what opened us up. It also opened up our friendship also because we found different ways to find different places to capture steel wool photography. And I think this is what really opened up composition, using the light in different ways, and really brought a different level of understanding to photography. So, next one.
How long was that?
2018 or 2019. This is another image.
Sorry, could you just maybe say a few words on what is steel wool photography, just for people who...
Sure. So, we'll go back there. So, steel wool photography, the simplest way that I could put it, steel wool is what it is used to scrub your pots. So, steel wool is something you can find in the hardware. It is very similar, if not the same thing, to like a pot scrub. And I'm not too sure about the chemical makeup in it, but when you do ignite it, it is something that the flame or the temperature of it, it's so high that when you swing it and it captures the oxygen, that is what creates the sparks. So steel wool is something I think it's good for light painting. And if you're experimenting with it, you have to be very careful because to create an image, I think it burns at a little over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
So when you do something like that, you have your fire extinguisher and stuff on.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, we keep fire extinguishers. Next image. So this image, now the images I'm going to show you, they're not in any chronological order, but you would notice a theme where I would keep saying that I kind of plan most of my images. I have a basic concept of locations from just scouting, just going to the ocean, going to the different bays. And this is one of the images that we captured in Balandra, which is the rough side of Balandra. So I knew that for this image, I would need high tide. So we kind of plan around high tide. Not all the times when we're going, everyone has the same plan, but I would usually kind of time what images I want. And I knew that this is one of the few beaches where I could get one of these sea stacks that it's relatively close, and at high tide, I could create the water flow. So again, bringing it back to planning, this is an image I planned probably for about 3 or 4 months. And while in Tobago, I'm usually in Tobago very often, I went to this beach and I kind of understood when the ocean would bring up sand versus when the bay would have rocks on it. And I knew all I needed was the right tide and the right weather pattern so that I could get the dark tones in the sky. Next one. This is another image. This is Balandra waterfall. So I knew on the day that we were going to capture a waterfall. Waterfalls are traditionally captured wide, but I knew I wanted to create something different. I knew I wanted something intimate, and I knew I wanted textures. So I went on to this location. One of my lenses I use at 18 to 135, and I told myself I'm not shooting at 18, 24, or 50, and I want to shoot something very intimate. And while going around, one of the things I also keep in mind is when I'm on site and I'm creating these more intimate images, is I would usually rock back a little bit and absorb the moment and absorb nature, kind of a bit of a reset for the mind. And I think there was a large group of us. That day was probably 4 or 5 of us. And I sat there and I just had my camera just on the tripod. And this was probably the only image I captured in probably about an hour and a half. And the only difference would be the different shutter speeds that I use. So this is one of my favorite images, just so that I could have the textures and the intimacy of a waterfall that is usually captured on a wide angle lens. Next one. This here is another image that I planned for a little while. I'm not traditionally an astrophotographer, but one of the things that fascinated me a lot, and it is the opposite of what most people would think, is the core of the Milky Way. I'm not as fascinated by the core of the Milky Way as I am the tail of the Milky Way. And there's millions of photos of the core, and I thought to myself, you know what? What about the beauty of the other side of the Milky Way? So on this night, Darren and I actually went to Manzilla. I think there was a blackout, or for a little while there was no electricity. So we know we were going to get dark skies. And while we were shooting, while we were shooting one direction for the core, while Darren was shooting one side for the core, I was actually shooting almost straight up or to the back of us. And this is one of the images of the tail. And I always envisioned that I wanted some nice cooler tones, and this was captured as a panorama on a 50mm Sigma lens that I recently got, and I was actually surprised by how sharp it was. And I think this is what sparked a bit of interest in astrophotography, although it's not something that I chase, but it is something that I'm fascinated by in terms of everything else other than the Milky Way core. Next one. This is another favorite image of mine. Again, with the theme, this is something that I planned for a little while, and this is actually in Orange Valley. One of the things that led me to shooting this image is reading a lot of magazines. So every time that I would go, you go to the doctor office, you go to the airport, you would see a lot of travel magazines. And one of the things that I took into consideration over the years was composition from a drone. And I really like the diagonals, and I knew in Orange Valley, when there's low tides, there's a different type of texture, as you can see in the lower half, and that was something that I really wanted to stress on, the way that when the water recedes, the different textures and the different leading lines you would get from that mud flat. And I think it also helped when I looked at it from a coastal erosion point of view. So that was something that I wanted to focus on, where the mangrove is slowly being eroded, and that is just part of climate change. So that really pushed me to want to keep this image and the frame, and I have hopes that one day it'll make it in the magazine. Next one. This is another image that I planned for a little while. One of the tools that I use is, I think it's Google Pro Earth. I use that a lot when planning. And one of the other things that I also look at is patterns. And this is one of the few areas that I found a very interesting pattern. And it's something that I kept going back for. I went for it probably like 2 or 3 times. And I think this was the 3rd time. I can't remember who I was. I think I was with Darren on this occasion. Yeah. This yeah. And this was something that I didn't expect it to look as good as it did. And it is one of the images that, it's not one of my favorite images because I really like the man-made structures, but I do like the patterns in it, and it's something that really pushed me to see, well, you know what, I could see this on a big image, just like what I'm seeing here, and that's something I also aim for. I aim for diversity in what I could see in big images versus a smaller canvas that you could see in a living space.
So, Tim,
Yeah.
when you say use Google Pro, for what? Like how?
with Google Pro, you could actually, so it's not just a one-dimensional view. With Google Pro, you could, I'll say, yeah, Google Pro Maps. You could actually change the angles on it, so it tells you the different terrain. So similar to when you go on Google and you see, you could change it from satellite to terrain. The terrain on Google Pro Maps, you could actually lift the angle that you're viewing it from, and you would actually get not just a two-dimensional outline, but it will be in 3D. So it also helps to understand the perspective and the distance that something would be at. It will also help me to understand when I go to a location, let's say it is seaside, how far back I will be from the actual waves, or if I'm shooting the land, how deep into the ocean I could actually be. So that usually helps a lot in planning. Next one. This is another image that I took in Orange Valley. I had this in mind for quite a while, and on this day there was a low tide. I think on this day I actually went to shoot birds. I think Nisha and I went on this day, and I had a drone with me, and I sent it up, and I did not expect to see the level of contrast between the boats and the mud flats, and that has really pushed me to be intrigued by this image. I entered this image in the Photographers Guild competition earlier this year, and this actually placed in first place in the drone category. The funniest thing about this image though is a lot of people were wondering about the angle, and they thought it could have been a horizontal, which I was a little bit confused about the direction of the sun rising, and if I looked across, which would have been further to my right, there was a total different sky. The white balance of the sky was totally different, and it was a bit challenging to actually get the two images to have the same white balance, because with the slightest angle change of the camera, and I shoot my white balance, I traditionally shoot it on auto, and it was challenging for me to ensure that the light on the water, the reflection on the water, and the rocks were all in sync. So,
Was this on a tripod? Or
pardon?
were you shooting on a tripod?
Yes, this was on a tripod.
In the sun and the...
Yeah, so my back was against the embankment for this one, and one of the things that I have a heavy tripod, so what I would do, I would usually just kind of jam the tripod into the sand, but a lot of people, they would usually press the tripod and they would release the shutter and try to move away, but I found that with a shutter speed of maybe 1/6 of a second, I could still hold the tripod and be as nervous as I could be and hope and pray that it is sharp, but I traditionally still try to hold the tripod down because the sand in especially that beach is very soft, so when the waves are receding, it does pull the tripod no matter what. No matter how much you push it into the ground, there will be some level of movement. So I traditionally try to hold on when I could. Right, this was another image that I planned. As you can see, we keep going with the planning. This was in Paramin. I think this was probably about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And I knew that I wanted layers. I knew what I wanted in terms of black to white. And traditionally, this is one of the perfect images where I could say, if you look to the top left, you would see that you kind of differentiate where the frame actually ends. So when I edit black and white, I would try to push some part of the image to pure white, but at the same time, keep in mind that I also want to push a part of the image into pure black. And even though I go to pure black, what I also try to do is to crush the blacks. And when I say crush the blacks, I mean I take the gloss out of the blacks and I bring it up to what will be like a charcoal black. So when I'm editing, I always keep that in mind. And an image like this, there are many places that you could go in Trinidad to actually see these layers. And I knew Paramin would be one of the few places I could go. And I was lucky on this day that the conditions were right. There is, if you look up to where the white on the left top is, if you really look, you would actually see the sun rays coming through, and that was probably one of the luckiest parts. But it's not a detail that I chose to highlight. because I didn't want it to overpower the layers of the hills in the northern range.
How many times you went back to?
No, actually, I got caught this on the first time. I can't remember. I think Darren and I, we were there on that day, and the weather was kind of bad, but I think I got on my first try. So something I planned for quite a while. And in terms of planning and execution, one of the things that kept me from capturing this image, apart from the direction of the light and the shadows, was this is in Port of Spain by the Queen's Park Savannah, and being able to actually go into Port of Spain, it's not something that everybody would do. Not everybody is comfortable taking your camera out in Port of Spain. Not everybody is comfortable sending a drone up. So it took a little bit of spark of bravery to actually go by myself and walk around the Queen's Park Savannah and send the drone up. And I was lucky on this day that there was nobody around. This was an afternoon time. And I was lucky that the time that I chose to go, that I would get such a long shadow in the tree. And again, if you look at it, I tried to get the blacks a little bit crushed, so it isn't that glossy black. But the thing about it is, unlike the other image, there wasn't an area that I could push to pure white, because this is actually green. So in my mind, I started to ask myself, well, how do I get the tones that I'm traditionally aiming for? So this is one of the exceptions here where you won't really find that pure white piece in an image. So, right, this was an image. I don't want to say I planned it, but there was a short period where I did plan, and it's an image that I'm sure a lot of photographers have. It's something that I think young photographers, they would also aim at. But one of the things that pushed me to actually going ahead and capturing this was on my right hand side are the power gen stacks. So when I saw that they were going to demolish those stacks, I thought to myself, you know what, this is the perfect time that I could capture those stacks, and not just the stacks, but the stacks in the entire Port of Spain, so that people could actually look back on it, in years to come and say, well, no, it's not just the stacks. It was the entire Port of Spain landscape that those stacks really affected. And now, even I pass and I look at it now, and Port of Spain isn't the same, Wrightson Road isn't the same. It's not the same landscape that it was now that the stacks are gone. So this image had very minor planning, but it was something I had in my mind for quite a while. Next one. This is one of my early images. The level of planning in this one was different. This was probably one of the first waterfalls that I went to. And I think this would have been in 2018 or 19. And what I knew that I wanted to attempt, and this is the aspect of planning, was the shutter speed. In the early days, most photographers, we pass through this phase of we want milky white water in all our waterfalls, because being able to control the shutter speed, it was so fascinating, and having this smooth bit of water, it really pushed the creativity level, because to understand the technology in a camera, that was probably the most mind-blowing part. And a lot of people, when I try to explain to them how a shutter speed works, it isn't a concept that I could explain easily. But when I show them an image like this, then it would start to be like, oh, I kind of understand what it is you're saying now. So this was an image where I knew I wanted that milky white water. And if you look at the image way back when I did the intimate image with Balandra, it'll show how my photography has changed and evolved over time, where now I appreciate textures a lot more. I appreciate the story that textures could tell versus an image like this. Right. Well, if you've seen it all oversaturated, it's not me. that is probably projector. So this image is in the same Guayame Bay or Rampanalgas, and I'm there pretty often. And I knew I could tell now with weather patterns when there are going to be rainbows. So on this day, I think this going forward maybe the change in theme where I don't really get to plan as much. So on this day, I saw the weather patterns and I just ran out to the beach and I was like, you know what, I expect to capture something. And I was lucky enough to get this rainbow arching over the entire bay. And I titled this one Pieces of Beauty because it's not a full rainbow. It's not a beautiful full rainbow that we're accustomed to. It's actually pieces of that beautiful moment. And one of the reasons that I knew that I knew where I was going though is I knew the rocks so well. I knew that the textures in the rocks would create nice leading lines. So I knew exactly where, when I saw that weather pattern, where to run out to, where to set up and get ready for this moment. And this is actually a 6-image panel where there's 3 at the bottom and 3 at the top. Yeah. This is another image, and this is one that I captured on an evening in Caroni. And similar now, you would see the theme changing, is that as much as I like to plan, there are images that we just can't plan for. And I remember going home one evening on the Beetham Highway, and I saw the weather pattern changing. And when I was probably around maritime, I saw the clouds open up, and they didn't just burst open. There was actually the rain was drizzling. So I had an idea that it was going to be a rainbow, and I started to see it as I got closer and closer to Grand Bazaar, and that just got me speeding. And I don't usually traditionally have my camera in the car, and this was one of the lucky days that I had the camera, and I flew down to Caroni, and I thought about using my 18 to 135 to capture a wider moment and the entire tree. But then within that few minutes, I actually told myself, you know what, I can't do that anymore because I'll shoot wide, and it kind of restricts my growth. And when I go back and I start to edit, I tell myself, there's no difference between some of my images in the past to now, so I have to find different ways to actually change it up. And I left the wide angle, and I had a EF 250 millimeter. I think it's like a 55 to 250. And I took that out and I said, you know what? I forced myself to actually capture something a little more intimate. And I was lucky on that day that there was a pui tree still in bloom. And I think that day the entire bottom of the tree was burnt from bushfires. So everything kind of worked out that day. This is one of my favorite images that I kind of kept to myself for a very long time. Right. So this is another image from Orange Valley, and I cannot remember how long ago I shot this, maybe last year. And this is another aspect of kind of showing that you really can't plan for everything. And on that day, I had enough equipment to do me that I could shoot landscape or I could shoot the flamingos that would usually be off in the distance. But I was lucky enough that one of the flamingos is an adolescent. He came close enough. And, I really focused on him for a long time and just kind of stayed calm and waited for him for when I say him or her, to actually get closer. And that day, I probably went home with maybe 2,000 images of just this one flamingo. And this was one of the moments that I couldn't help myself with, just so that we could show that bit of movement when they go through the mud feeding, and I was lucky enough to get those water droplets in the angle they were at. This was on the same day, so I knew what I wanted in terms of a reflection. I started to plan on that same day. So while I was there sitting along the embankment, I knew that hey, the water is still, it's low tide. There would be a moment that I could get a good reflection. But I couldn't imagine that I would get it this perfect, where we could actually see a drop of water from the flamingo's feet, and you actually get a reflection of it at the same time. I tell myself it's probably not the best image in the world, but for some reason I like the angles. I like the angle of the feet and the triangle it creates. I like the little bit of texture in the water. I like the texture of the droplets, and I keep this one. I always go back to it and I say, you know what, This is one of the images that I really like for myself. Um, and it's one of my better images of flamingos so far. All right, this is another moment. This was in Coral Valley. This wasn't long ago. Um, and I shot this on a morning where I went to Coral Valley. I knew Coral Valley has missed from our conversations, like with Darren and Lawrence Ryan. And we went there, and I knew what I wanted on that day, but what I wanted I wasn't getting. And this is something that was a little bit unexpected. And traditionally, I would look in the background at the hills and I would look for those cool tones, but I couldn't help myself um, when it comes to how the light was playing off of the bamboo stool and the shapes that it was creating, looking like claws created by the light. And one of the things that in a lot of conversations that I have with Lawrence, Darren, and Nisha and Ryan, is finding different ways and finding ways to tell a story. And I like the idea of the bamboo looking like it's clawing its way out of the earth or out of the darkness. And the light really helps to accentuate that story. I really went there to capture the mist over the agricultural land. And I thought to myself on that day, if I could do a long exposure to actually get the mist moving and get that nice, smooth, milky look, that would probably be one of my best images. And it turned out to be a dud. It turned out to be something that really wasn't worth it because the mist traditionally moves so quickly, unlike what you would see in the States or higher up in England. The mist kind of moves and it's so thick, it's basically fog, that you could actually create textures in it. But our mist, it's so thin and it moves much faster. It's difficult to replicate that type of texture. This one, this I would, traditionally once I'm shooting fast, I would usually look at 1/125, and anything under that, I would go all the way down to 1/6 of a second. So I usually don't go in between that for much of anything. No, not this one. No. Yeah. Yeah. Um, it may have been the image before. Let's just check back and see. No, not this one either. Nah. I don't think so. Should, yeah, long exposure. Yeah. Yeah, that would usually be my slowest that I would think. But one of the things that I could have probably gone down to 180 because in Coral, the valley itself doesn't have that much wind. So there is the opportunity. Yeah, it is very still up there. So there is the opportunity. And I shot this on the 18-135, that's an EF lens. And the aperture I would have used, I usually start off at f9. That's like the sweet spot on our lens. And if I think that I want to be 100% sure, I'll usually go down to f16. And this was shot in the same valley. This was in Coral Valley. And this is the idea of the mist that I was talking about. So this image here, this was kind of what I had in mind, but the execution of it on the day, it was just difficult because of how the mist was moving. And this is a bit of editing. So this isn't a 100% image straight out of camera. So this was focus stacking, and also there was a bit of movement in the tree on this side. So it took a little bit of editing to get this tree to be still, and I did go down to a slower shutter speed to capture the light. I think this was pretty early in the morning, so it was a bit darker. I can't remember 100% the details in it, but I know this was a focus stack image, and also the light on it. This is a little bit of play through Photoshop because the light wasn't as bright as it may seem in the image, so it took me a little bit of dodging and burning to create that atmosphere. Yeah.
It's a nice mystical
Yeah.
feeling, like something going on in your heart there that makes it a little bit like
Yeah. Well, I was lucky. Yeah. Yeah. And the image from before and this one, they are two totally different images in my mind. Whereas the image before, where you can see like the claws kind of crawling out, that is something that I try to push myself for with the more artistic style. Whereas this one is more that wide landscape image that you traditionally see. In terms of the light on the hut, I was lucky enough that that moment that there was light there, I don't think it lasted very long. So that's why I had to focus stack because I captured the light, but not all the details of everything else around it was what I wanted. So I actually had to pick and
it
choose.
does look like, like sometimes when you get a breakthrough of light through the sky.
Yeah, yeah,
Just people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be lucky.
yeah. This was another image going with the theme of not planning. So this is one of the days that we went to Salivia. I think it was a big group of us. And I really didn't plan on shooting much that day. I actually shot a little bit and I started to do my usual routine where I would pack up early. I'm usually the first one to pack up on a site. And I just kind of was just in the moment, just enjoying the sunrise. And eventually, when I walk across, I think it was Lawrence and Nisha. I couldn't help myself with the leading lines and the way the line led you to the island in the background. And Lawrence and all, he was pushing me. He was like, "Well, take out your camera, let me shoot something. You can't wrap up so early." And if you look at the leading line itself, it's not a perfect line. There's a little bit of imperfection in it, and I kept that purposefully because I wanted to keep the memory of when Nisha spoiled the leading line. I told myself, I told myself that will be the story that I could keep because we're all shooting and she's just there playing hopscotch and breaking down the embankment. So I decided to keep that to really help with the story. Next one.
Story.
Yeah. This was another image that I envisioned for a while, but I did not expect it to be one of my favorite. When I say woodland, Trinidad doesn't have that type of woodland where we could walk into like in Canada. But it's something that I always wanted. I wanted an intimate image of the immortals, and this was up in Las Cuevas. And this was on a morning. I did not expect to get this nice golden light coming over the hills and illuminating the trees this way. It is a bit saturated here. It's not that it wasn't that golden, but I wanted again to push myself to not capture a 18 millimeter or 24 millimeter wide image of the immortal trees just growing. I wanted to actually capture something intimate where I could showcase the textures and the color and the light on the trees. And this golden light really paid off on that day. And this is probably one of my favorite woodland type images, or what I would class as woodland for Trinidad and Tobago. Next one. Yeah. This is another image that I did not plan, and it goes with the second half of the theme of not being able to plan everything. And I went to the temple by the sea hundreds of times by now. Some days for photography, some days just to relax. And I could not help myself but with how the water is receding. And it's not that there isn't a very obvious leading line, but if you really pay attention to the curvature of the water, you will actually see the leading lines and the slight reflections of the temple. This image is actually a composition, a composite, sorry, because the sky changed very quickly on that day. And not a lot of people could tell because it was just 10 minutes apart. So the light actually coming through from behind the temple kind of remained the same on the reflection in the water, but the clouds started to change. So I actually decided, you know what, I'll take a couple images of this. And when I got back and I started to edit, I thought that as a black and white, I could really probably do something a little different, and it turned out to be a composite. And this image, I actually sold a couple copies of this image in the past around Diwali time. Um, and I actually saw a lot of people overseas tend to like this image a lot more.
When you convert into black and white, do you go out to shoot intentionally with that in mind, or you decide when you're at the
Yeah.
computer?
I do plan a lot when I go to shoot black and white. I know what I want. So usually if I'm shooting a black and white, I can't say specifically about this image on this day, but now what I would do, if I'm shooting black and white, I shoot under by one stop. And I shoot under so that I could manipulate the highlights a lot easier than I can manipulate the blacks. So I always try to keep the shadows, and I would play around with my highlights a lot more. And I think when I try to shoot at the right exposure, or what the meter would say is the right exposure, I find that I'm not too sure if it's my technique, but I find the highlights a little bit harder to control. So I usually try to stop down by one, and that way now I could still manipulate the blacks and how I like to crush the blacks into that kind of charcoal texture. This is in Togo, what we traditionally call Togo Beach. This day, I think all three of these were shot around the same period of time, like around the same month, and I wasn't too sure. But on this day, I really didn't plan on shooting much. Like I knew I wanted the center image. I knew I went there looking for leading lines into the ocean, but I couldn't help myself in terms of composition with the boats and the different colors of the boats. You really can't see it here, but around the same time, I started to switch my editing style. I really started to use what we call the autumn effect to give the trees and my greens and leaves a little more of a dreamy effect. And from this period on, I usually, once I'm doing anything with leaves, greenery, even in my portrait work, which you'll get a glimpse of coming up, I would usually put that autumn effect into it. I'll go a little more into it, how I use it in portraiture as we go along. This is another image. This was from Brasso Seco. This is another unplanned image, but it's also one of my intimate images. And
Where is this?
in Brasso Seco. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not too sure. Darren, you remember my name of this photo? Twin, right. Yeah. So usually I'm the last one on a trail. I'm always behind. And on this day, I just said, you know what, forget that. If we have to go up we have to climb an extra tier to get up this thing, we're doing it. And we got up there. A lot of people, they would first see the waterfall and the intimacy of the image. But one of the things that stand out to me is the rock at the bottom. It kind of has this look of like a dolphin or a whale. And that's what really stood out to me. And that is probably the memorable part of it. And it looks like a fossilized whale then. And so that's the memorable aspect. This was another image that I captured. I knew I wanted the textures on that day. And this image here, I think this was shot at maybe 1/6 of a second. I probably should have looked at some of the metadata before I put it together. But this was probably 1/6 of a second. Next one.
I find that the rock art looks kind of like, it's left there by some aliens or something.
Yeah.
It's like it's
I like the idea. I like it.
it looks otherworldly, right? It looks like it's out of place.
Yeah. Anything with that?
Even the colors on the rock higher up,
Yeah.
it starts to take on some sort of mineral.
Metallic
kind of
Yeah.
copper tint.
Yeah,
So,
to me, that's two pictures.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. I could see that. And anything with a good alien background, yeah, I'm all for it. So, right. So going ahead now. So this is now we go into the portraiture side. Something that I've been dabbling in for maybe the last 2 years, and it took me a while to actually get into this. And one of the things that in the build up to shooting portraiture is I knew I wanted to understand composition. And when I frame someone, I really want to have the composition be in the focus of the photo. And this was something, this image, probably like about 15 images ago with the rainbow. This is the same rock. I planned this image because I knew on this rock, I could eliminate the rock and I could now have a dress and a sky. And I like the leading lines that the dress creates. And this is probably one of my early images where I got brave and I told myself, you know what? If I commit, I could create this type of portraiture and I could incorporate my landscape stuff, my landscape techniques into portraiture. And again, if you look at the way that I edit the black and white, you would see there are areas that are white, some areas that are black, and there would be a little bit of gray in between, which I try to stick to as the term says it's black and white. So, and we traditionally cut it down to BNW. So I usually do black, neutral, which I refer to as gray, and white. So I try to keep that theme going forward with my portrait work also.
And so it was deliberate to make it look like a waterfall, a dress.
Not like a waterfall, but I knew that I wanted it to fill the frame, and I knew that I wanted to create that infinity look. So that was the purpose of getting the dress out there. Actually, Darren was with me on this day. Yeah, it took some work to actually get this image.
The dress itself, though, the base of the dress is coming forward.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is. I was holding one side, Darren was holding the other side, and I tried to get the camera as close to the material as possible so that I could have that nice fall off into the model. This is an image I shot just probably about a month ago. Again, this is another planned image. So I go back to my planning stages and I knew what I wanted. I wanted that dark, edgy, urban feel that we see on Instagram a lot. But I knew that there was an opportunity where I could bring that urban style into my portrait work. And it was a challenge to find the right location. But from me being in San Fernando so much, I knew there were angles on High Street that I could use, and it took a little bit of planning in terms of the time and the day. And this was on a Sunday afternoon where there was limited amount of traffic, and I actually needed someone brave enough to stand in the middle of the road, and someone with that type of that introverted type of look. And I was lucky enough, yeah, like about a month ago, that High Street was just the right place. The editing is what really pushed the image, and it took a lot. So I would say for any young photographer that happens to look at this, something like an image like this does not come overnight. I don't think an image like this could happen to anybody within a year or two time. It takes a lot of time to understand how to shoot again, bringing it back to shooting underexposed, because you have to shoot deliberately for something like this. It takes a lot to understand how a lens works, because this isn't shot with a wide lens. This is shot very far back at maybe 180 mil, and to capture this takes a bit of planning, and then after that now it takes quite a bit of editing to really nail the vision that you would have. And this was edited and exported probably 10 times before I was satisfied with the end product. Next. This is a 70 to 200, the Canon version 2. Yeah? Yeah.
You
And
mentioned that
yeah, that was the aim. I wanted to find like a big city look, but we don't really have that location. So that's why I chose to shoot this at, as I say, average maybe 180, so I could get the compression and get the buildings in the background to appear as big as they do.
you
Yeah.
mentioned you would have exported it about 29
Yeah.
That's when you get something very fine, especially if you do stuff for the web or social media.
Yes.
And most people do it on the phone.
Yes.
I find myself when we export it and they
Mm-hmm.
check to see how the colors are getting
It's oversaturated most times.
most times.
Yeah.
So I guess so that's what you do as well.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're going to place in
Yeah. So a lot of times I would export and look at it on my phone over and over and keep tweaking it. But what I found very helpful is in Lightroom, I did mention the autumn effect. And again, this is the wildflower truss. And planning, I knew what I wanted. This is a location I've seen hundreds of times in social media. But one of the things I haven't seen is someone shoot it with the eye for a landscape photographer and also edit it like a landscape photographer. So I knew what I wanted in terms of composition, but the editing is what I actually shot it for. And the autumn effect is an effect that gives it a type of dreamy look. Your image would not seem as sharp at a glance, but really, actually, if you zoom into the image, it is still very sharp. So this is one of the images that I took the autumn effect from my landscape photography experience, and I use it in my portrait work now. And I found that it's gathered very good reception because a lot of clients now they don't know what's different about it. They would look at it, they say, but this image just looks so dreamy. And I think this is what I use to kind of separate myself a little bit from the rest of portrait photographers. Yeah, next one. This is an image again here that I didn't plan, but it's one of the nice images. And I threw this one in because it is also the challenge in this one was editing. I thought it was worth mentioning that editing green on green is challenging, composing is challenging. I shot this one for Eid this year, Eid al-Fitr. And also this one took a little bit of editing in terms of composition. So an image like this is not as wide as it may seem. So a lot of things would have been edited, and there are different ways you could change your composition in Photoshop. So one of the things that I also use as a technique when on site I don't execute the image that I would want to have is I would usually stretch and distort a background. So one of the things you could do in Photoshop is you could select an area and you could use the distort option, and an area that maybe is just a centimeter, there is the opportunity where you could stretch it to maybe 3 centimeters and elongate certain parts of a subject or a background. This is one of the images that I did stretch a little bit to get the pine trees to look a little taller, and to keep the subject in the location, because capturing the location for me is just as important as capturing the subject. Next one. This is again another example of how I look at portrait photography and how I compose. This was a wedding I shot a little while ago, and I was lucky enough that this couple was in love with landscape photography as much as they were in love with one another. And we spoke about the day after their wedding, which was the photo shoot day, and the locations. And they were very receptive of trying something different, trying to shoot much wider, trying to incorporate nature into their memories. And it fell right into my lap, and we were able to create what I think is one of my best images, where we could actually see like the husband just letting go of himself. He's very much an introvert. So for him to actually open his arms and really look around and be one with his wife in that moment. And the composition was something that really stood out to me, with the trees overarching them and they just walk in what I would say is infinity, where the road just leads them into their own pathway. And I was able to actually talk about this with them after, and they actually felt the story just as much as I saw it. They saw it the same way also. Next one. This is a different type of image. This is something like a lot of portrait stuff that you would see on social media, Instagram. A lot of it will be beauty, and there are these cornfields that I would see in central Trinidad, and I had this vision that I could get the cornfield backlit. But the thing about it is, just shooting the leaves being back. It was kind of boring. And, I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I could get someone to put them in the cornfields and have that light behind them. And I think this is just one of my social media images that I envisioned and I was able to bring to light. This is also one of the first images where I really started to push dodging and burning and being able to create different tones on the body. And this really opened up my mind to what's possible with dodging and burning on subjects and models.
Did you plan the color of the dress in terms of the color harmony of it?
Yes. So I knew what I wanted to play against the green was a red dress. And initially it started off kind of like this farm girl type of theme. So I knew the red, I kind of wanted like a red plaid shirt, but that was kind of difficult for us to find. So we kind of worked with what she had, and the red just works well against the green. I did push the red a little bit into the burgundy side, just because I didn't want it to distract from the entire picture. I didn't want that to be the brightest part of the picture because the red was pretty bright.
I prefer the dress. I feel as though the red flag should have been a bit cliche American.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Dress gives it, it gives
Yeah.
it a more Caribbean, Latin American kind of feel, which I think makes it a lot more powerful.
yeah, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. And on that day, I think the plaid shirt, I think we were having difficulty finding it, but I was open to something different. One of the things, along with how I mentioned planning, is everyone that I shoot for my concepts that isn't a client, I tend to plan with them and I try to open them up to having conversations for like about 2 weeks to a month before. So we would know on the day what we're going to execute, the colors, the moments, because I shoot in a small window of usually around an hour before sunrise to get the softest light. And in this case here now, to get the sun at that angle so that we could get like that backlighting would probably just been about 20 minutes. So it took a lot of us planning how to execute in the moment.
Do you use any lighting on the subject or you just draw it?
I did use a umbrella on that day, a shoot-through umbrella. Yeah, and this was when I just started to use off-camera flash. Probably just had like about 3 or 4 months exposure to it, and I was always scared of off-camera flash because I just didn't have the experience shooting landscapes so often and so much for the past 5 years. To introduce something else that I needed to control for myself was difficult. Whereas with a landscape image, if there isn't any light, well, if somebody asks, well, why didn't we wait for light? There just wasn't any light. But in this case now, there is no reason for me to say now why I didn't add light to the image. Yeah. Right, this is another image that I shot. I added this one just to show the framing and how I value composition. So this couple, they wanted to shoot something in nature, and one of the things I always look at, this is in Chaguaramas on the golf course road, is the overhanging bamboo. And this was just like a natural frame that I always thought to myself, you know what, this is perfect. This is right up my alley. This is what I've been shooting landscapes all these years, so I understand framing and composition, and I understand how to use the roadway as a leading line that they could stand on. And I added this one just because it's one of my favorite images. I like the emotion in it. I like the couple was in their moment. They were having a good time, and something about it just connects with me. And I always go back to this, even on my website, and I would usually take a picture of the computer screen and send it to them to just tell them, I just go back to it so that it can make me smile, because it's a natural moment and they're genuinely smiling and laughing there in the moment. I'm not too sure if there's one more. Maybe this is it. Oh, right. There is one more. These are some images that I shot in early pandemic. This was when we were not supposed to be outside, and we all challenge ourselves. Darren, Brahim, Lawrence, Nisha, and I. We all challenge ourselves to do a little bit of food photography and still life. I think around the same time TTPS had put out a challenge on their Facebook. So to create like a pandemic or COVID image from inside, and I took up the challenge. I got like some of the backdrops, and I started to buy fruits and food that I know I probably would never eat, and I started to send the grocery bill up by extra $200 to really experiment with it. And these images actually taught me a lot, and this was probably my first time um, using artificial light to help light some of these images. These images were very challenging. It's not something that I take lightly, and it's something that I have a lot of respect for in terms of food photography. This is probably a lot harder to learn than landscape photography and portraiture. So hats off to all the food photographers out there. But these are some of my favorite images that I captured from, I would let's say around early 2020. Yeah. Yeah.
Really, really
Yeah.
good. It's otherwise, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Lime and the grape.
Yeah. The lime and the grapefruit. Yeah. Well, that grapefruit bill was probably the highest because to find all those different colors and limes and everything, that was a challenge on its own. And I'll just show you there's one more. Oh, that's it. Right. So that's it. All right. Thank you very much. We'll enjoy questions. Yeah. Any questions?
Well, if I try to answer that, that's a good along.
Yeah.
If you use any apps apart from the Google Chrome apps, any apps that are like light or
Yes, I have one app. It's called, I think it's Ephramis, EPHRMIS. I use that because it's a free app that I can plan the angle of the moon and those things. Although I don't shoot it that much, but I use that to plan what angles my device. That's one of the few apps that I use.
Yeah, you talk a lot about, I should have started content earlier on, or planning.
Yeah.
Walk us through your, this like the big steps of your planning process.
So planning.
How you visualize, and then you
Yeah.
find the space, or you know the space, and then kind of.
Yeah. So planning comes along with me being exposed to the features that I'm about. So I have that advantage over a lot of people. I mean, footballer, where most of my landscape work has been shot. So I know what Rampanagas looks like, I know what Balanta looks like, I know what Mission Bay looks like, San Susi. So planning comes a little easier. But the planning aspect of it that I would usually focus on, maybe a month or two, sometimes longer, but the angle that you start on the horizon. Even though I don't usually chase actual sunrise in a location, I don't need the sun itself, but I do need the light. So I will keep that in mind. Similar to one of the early images with the sarcasm, I knew that I wanted the sarcasm, I knew that I wanted the tones in it. So it took a little bit of planning in terms of monitoring when the sarcasm was at its thickest or at its highest point. And I knew that I would have Rampanagas there almost once a month, that I would be there. So it was just a matter of monitoring it, going out there and looking.
so no point where you want to flint some sarcasm in a picture because you shoot it with that.
On all the images I showed you today, no. Maybe on another day, probably if it isn't as thick, or I probably would do that, but what I would do is probably when the water is receding, if there isn't the right textures in it, I would be open to say, look, I could grab some sargassum, I could throw it. So when the water does pull it back out, I could get the type of textures I want. I think a lot of landscape photographers, they do manipulate the scene that they're on, whether it is to pick up a leaf out of a frame, or some people they add a leaf to a frame. Sometimes there's garbage that they have to move, and that isn't what you meet there. So let's say I do throw some seaweed into a frame. I look at that as some may say cheating. I think it's just part of creation. Yeah. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Two.
Yeah.
We was only given one per person.
Easiest one, right?
Yeah.
So you should
they'd rather landscape photography, street
Thing Darren and I we spoke a lot on, and we pointed environmental portraiture, but with the beauty side of it. And I'm having a lot more fun right now using the off-camera flash and using different types of um, of lights and different types of umbrellas and being able to light a model and create my own image. And why I would lean into the portrait work right now is because I could still compose. I still have that aspect of being able to go to a waterfall, but add a human aspect of it into it, and still being able to capture landscape, but with someone in it. So it is it is a bit of a cheat, but it is something that I look at because a lot of the planning, I look at location before I look at a model, I look at a subject. It's all about location first.
So my last question, if you could go back to your younger self,
I would still buy a Canon.
and you give yourself advice that you will take, what would it be?
Oh, that's a hard question. Well, first, stay in the gym because I can't keep up on half the hikes. I think I would go back to that 21-year-old with a point and shoot Nikon, and I would continue using a Nikon. And even in my full-time career now, I don't think I would be in it now. I think I would have been a photographer from much younger because if I knew that my mind could have opened up to this art form, I would have done it a lot earlier in life. I think I would have looked at portrait photography and landscape photography at a much younger age. You say I had a hard question?
Last question. Um, if you had to give somebody one of the up-and-coming advice,
Buy a Canon, buy a Canon.
who's doing landscape and they want to switch to portraits,
Yeah.
what advice would you give?
Who wants to switch from landscape to portraits?
Yeah, because it's something you've done.
Yeah. I would say don't rush into it. You have to start somewhere. You have to find what is pleasing to you as an artist. With photography, I look at it as an art form, and I would say, when I say don't rush it, shoot as much as you could, and over a period of time, you would find what is your sweet spot, and you would find what is your editing style, you would find what is your composition style. And similar to a lot of international photographers, usually when you're scrolling through social media, Instagram, TikTok even, Facebook, you would be able to scroll and see someone's image and immediately tell who that person is. And I think that's something that doesn't come overnight. So I think patience is a very big part of it. So be patient and find what is your sweet spot along the way. Yeah? Yeah. So I have one more thing, and this is my first, let me know when I'm free. So this is my first time actually doing anything on photography, like publicly. So I actually took the time, because photography is pretty close to me. Nisha, Darren, Rahim, Lawrence, they're all very close to me. So I actually took the time and I pushed myself to write something that I thought reflected my journey, and it's questions I would ask myself. And a part of me that I thought, you know what, let me let it out. So bear with me with this one. It's short. What does photography mean to me? This seemingly simple question has often left me wondering for far longer than I should have. At times, it felt as though I was chasing an art form that I might never fully understand. And the more I searched, the deeper I fell in love with this form of art and what it has taught me. Is photography a form of art? A canvas where I paint with light instead of a brush? Is it my means of expression? My way of being an artist when my hands never understood the craft of drawing? Is it perhaps my sanctuary, my escape from the daily monotony that we all experience? Do these photographic pursuits infuse positivity into my life? or do they merely remain an extravagant investment in camera gear, the worth of which remains debatable? At what, after all, is the ultimate destination of my photographic journey? These questions for the longest time confounded me. But as I look back upon my photographic journey, I realize that the true wealth I've gathered is not measured in equipment or technical expertise. In this phase of our planet, we live through social media, and what I've come to treasure the most are the people I've encountered along the way, the friendships and human connections that have brought laughs and conversations with depth that one can only find when at peace. Photography is my peace.